I spent 40 years building the house my children would one day call home. I never imagined they would be the ones to lock its doors against me. My name is Helen Morris. I am 60 years old. And as I sit here now, telling you this story, my hands, these weathered, cracked hands that once held my babies, that scrubbed floors at 3 in the morning, that cooked 10,000 meals and folded a mountain of laundry, these hands are trembling. They have not stopped trembling since that night. The night I stood on the doorstep of my own home and heard the click of a lock that changed everything. I want to tell you this story not for pity, not for vengeance, but because I need someone to understand. I need someone to hear what happens when the very people you gave your life to decide that your life no longer matters. This is my story. The story of a mother. A wife. A woman who believed, with every fiber of her being, that family was the one thing in this world that could never betray you. I was wrong. Let me start by telling you about the house. It sits on a quiet street in a town that could be anywhere. It could be a suburb of Manchester or a neighborhood in Ohio. It could be a cul-de-sac in Kent or a tree-lined avenue in Pennsylvania. That is the tragedy of this story. It happens everywhere. Every single day. To mothers just like me. The house is modest by any standard. 2 stories. Red brick that we laid ourselves, one summer when money was tight and David said, "We'll do it together, Helen. We'll make it work." 3 bedrooms upstairs, a kitchen that smelled of roasting chicken on Sundays, a living room where my children took their first steps. David and I bought that house when we were 22 years old. We were young. So impossibly young. We had nothing but each other and a dream that felt too big for our small pockets. The mortgage was a weight that pressed down on us for decades, but we never complained. We never once looked at each other and said, "This is too hard." Because we knew what we were building. We were building a home. David, my David, he was different then. Strong in a way that made me feel safe just standing beside him. He worked at the factory during the day, his hands blackened with grease and labor, and then he came home and worked on the house at night. I would bring him tea at midnight, watching him sand the wooden floors in the hallway, his back bent, his muscles aching. He never stopped. He never gave up. "This is for them," he would say, wiping sweat from his forehead. "For our children. Someday, they'll understand." I believed him. I believed every word. We did not have our first child until we were 28. Those 6 years of waiting felt like a lifetime, but we needed to be ready. We needed the house to be finished. We needed to be able to give our children a foundation, a place where they would always feel loved. Our son, Michael, was born on a cold February morning. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapping around my thumb, and I wept. I wept because I had never felt such love. I wept because I knew, in that moment, that I would do anything for this child. I would walk through fire. I would sacrifice everything. 2 years later, our daughter, Sarah, arrived. A spring baby, born with her father's eyes and my mother's stubborn chin. She was a fighter from the beginning, screaming her way into the world, demanding attention. I loved her fiercely. Those early years were hard. God, they were hard. David worked double shifts while I stayed home with the children, stretching every penny until it snapped. I learned to cook meals from almost nothing. I learned to sew patches onto clothes that had already been mended 3 times. I learned to smile through exhaustion, to sing lullabies when I could barely keep my eyes open, to be everything my children needed even when I had nothing left to give. But I never complained. Not once. Because every sacrifice was an investment. Every sleepless night was a deposit into a future I believed in. I was building something sacred. I was building a family. The years passed in a blur of school plays and skinned knees, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, of laughter that echoed through the halls of our little house. I watched my children grow. I watched Michael become a young man, tall and confident, with his father's strong shoulders and a smile that could light up any room. I watched Sarah blossom into a young woman, fierce and independent, with dreams that stretched far beyond our quiet street. I was proud. So unbelievably proud. David and I talked often about what would come next. About retirement. About growing old together in the house we had built with our own hands. We would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, and I would lean my head against his shoulder and say, "We did it, David. We made it." He would kiss my forehead and whisper, "The best is yet to come, Helen." I believed him. I always believed him. Our plan was simple. When the children were grown and settled, when they had families of their own, we would welcome them back. The house would become a gathering place, a sanctuary for grandchildren and Sunday dinners and all the warmth we had worked so hard to create. We would grow old surrounded by love. We would die knowing that our sacrifices had meant something. That was the dream. That was what we lived for. I can still remember the exact moment I realized something was changing. It was not a single event, not a dramatic confrontation. It was subtle. Like a crack forming in a foundation, invisible at first, spreading slowly until the entire structure begins to crumble. Michael was 32 when he married Catherine. She was a beautiful woman, sharp and ambitious, with a way of looking at me that made me feel small. I tried to welcome her into our family. I tried to love her as I loved my own daughter. But there was always a distance between us, a coldness I could never quite bridge. At first, I blamed myself. I thought I was not trying hard enough. I invited them to dinner every Sunday. I sent birthday cards and called on holidays. I offered to babysit when their first child was born, my precious grandson Thomas, and I held him in my arms and wept just as I had wept when I held Michael for the first time. But Catherine did not want my help. She made that clear in 1,000 small ways. The way she would take Thomas from my arms after only a few minutes. The way she would roll her eyes when I offered advice. The way she would whisper to Michael when she thought I could not hear, and the way his expression would change afterward, guarded, distant, like I was a stranger. Sarah's change was different but equally painful. She moved to the city after university, chasing a career that consumed her entirely. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. She would cancel plans at the last minute with excuses that grew thinner each time. When she finally married, we were not invited to the wedding. We learned about it on social media, seeing photographs of our daughter in a white dress, surrounded by people we did not know, in a place we had never been. David cried that night. The only time I had ever seen him cry since his mother passed away. "Where did we go wrong, Helen?" he asked me, his voice cracking. "What did we do?" I had no answer. I still do not have an answer. The distance grew wider. Michael stopped calling unless he needed money. Sarah stopped calling altogether. When we visited, we were treated like inconveniences, like unwanted guests who had overstayed our welcome. Our grandchildren did not know us. They would cling to Catherine's mother, a woman who had done nothing to earn their love, while looking at us with the blank stares of strangers. I tried to talk to Michael about it once. I sat across from him at his kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and I asked him, "What happened to us? What happened to our family?" He looked at me with eyes that I no longer recognized. "Times change, Mum," he said. "People grow apart. It's just how life works. Just how life works." As if 40 years of sacrifice could be dismissed with a shrug. As if the love I had poured into him, the nights I had sat beside his bed when he was sick, the dreams I had set aside so he could chase his own, as if none of it mattered at all. I went home that night and sat in the dark for hours. David found me there, staring at the wall, and he held me without speaking. There were no words that could comfort me. There were no words that could explain how a mother's heart can break so completely and still keep beating. The final blow came on a Thursday. I remember it was Thursday because David and I had been planning a trip to visit my sister in Scotland. We were supposed to leave on Saturday, and I had spent the week packing our bags, excited for a change of scenery, for a chance to escape the heaviness that had settled over our lives. Michael called that morning. His voice was strange, flat and rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. "Mom, Catherine and I have been talking," he said. "We think it would be best if you and Dad moved into a smaller place. Something more manageable for your age." I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought he was joking. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "We love our house. We built that house. We're not going anywhere." There was a long pause. "The thing is," Michael continued, "we've been looking at the finances. The house is worth quite a bit now. Catherine thinks it would make more sense for us to take it over. You know, before things get complicated." My blood ran cold. "Take it over? It's practical, Mum. You're getting older. What if something happens? What if you can't maintain it anymore? This way, it stays in the family, and you two can find a nice flat somewhere, something with less upkeep." I could not speak. My mouth opened, but no words came out. David was watching me from across the room, his face pale with concern. "Michael," I finally managed, "this is our home. Your father and I built this home for 40 years. Every room, every wall, every memory, this is our life." "I know that, Mum. But..." "No." My voice was shaking now. "No. We are not leaving our home. Not now. Not ever." The call ended shortly after. Michael's voice had turned cold, the way it always did when he did not get what he wanted. I stood in the kitchen, clutching the phone, feeling as though the floor had opened beneath me. David came to me, took the phone from my hands, and wrapped his arms around me. "They're not taking our house," he whispered into my hair. "This is our home, Helen. They cannot take it from us." But even as he said it, I could hear the fear in his voice. We did not go to Scotland. We stayed home, waiting for something we could not name, watching the phone with a mixture of dread and hope. 2 weeks later, we came back from a doctor's appointment to find the locks had been changed. I want you to understand what that moment felt like. I want you to close your eyes and picture it. Picture standing on the doorstep of the house where you raised your children, where you celebrated every birthday and every Christmas, where you stayed up all night nursing fevers and soothing nightmares. Picture reaching for the door handle, the same handle you have touched 10,000 times, and finding that it does not turn. Picture the confusion. The disbelief. The slow, creeping horror as you realize what has happened. David tried his key 3 times. Each time, it slid into the lock, and each time, it refused to turn. His hands were shaking. His breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. "There must be a mistake," he said. "There must be some mistake." I pressed my hand against the door. The wood was smooth beneath my palm, worn from years of use, familiar as my own skin. I could feel the warmth from inside seeping through. Someone had turned on the heating. Our heating. In our home. "Michael?" I called, my voice cracking. "Michael, are you there?" Silence. David pounded on the door with his fist. "Open this door," he shouted. "Michael, this is our house. You have no right to do this." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a shape appeared in the frosted glass beside the door. A figure, standing just inside, making no move to open it. Catherine's voice came through the door, muffled but unmistakable. "David, Helen. You need to leave." Her tone was cold. Not angry, not apologetic, just cold. Like she was telling a delivery person they had come to the wrong address. "Catherine, please." I was crying now, the tears streaming down my face, my voice reduced to a desperate whisper. "Please, this is our home. Let us in." "It's not your home anymore," she replied. "The paperwork is being processed. Michael's name is going on the deed. You were supposed to be notified, but I suppose you didn't check your mail." Paperwork. Deeds. Legal terms that meant nothing to me in that moment, that could not penetrate the wall of grief crashing down around me. "Where is my son?" David's voice was hoarse. Where is Michael? Let me speak to my son. There was a pause, and then Michael's voice, quiet and ashamed but firm. Dad, please. Just go. It's better this way. Better this way. I heard those words, and something inside me shattered. My hand was still pressed against the door, and I could not remove it. I could not move. I stood there, frozen, as if my palm could somehow reach through the wood and touch my son's face, could somehow remind him of who I was, of what he had once meant to me, of what we had once been to each other. David grabbed my shoulders and pulled me away from the door. His face was gray, his eyes hollow with a pain I had never seen before. Come on, Helen, he whispered. Come on. We need to go. I turned around. The street stretched before me, familiar and yet completely foreign. The streetlights flickered on, casting pools of orange light onto the pavement. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood at her window, watching us with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. She did not come outside. She did not ask if we were okay. No one did. We walked away from our home. Our home, where our children had been born, where we had built a life, where every inch of wall held a memory. We walked away, and behind us, I heard the soft click of a door being bolted shut. The night was cold. A sharp, biting cold that cut through my coat and settled into my bones. November in England is unforgiving, the kind of cold that makes your breath turn to mist, that makes your fingers ache even when you shove them deep into your pockets. We walked for hours. At least, it felt like hours. Time lost all meaning. I was aware only of the pavement beneath my feet, of David's hand clutching mine, of the house growing smaller and smaller behind us until it disappeared into the darkness. Eventually, we stopped at a bus shelter. The kind with a plastic bench and a flickering light overhead, covered in advertisements for things we would never need. David helped me sit down, and I collapsed against him, shaking with sobs I could no longer contain. How? I whispered between gasps. How did this happen, David? How did our children become strangers? He did not answer. He just held me, his arms wrapped around me, his chin resting on top of my head. I could feel his heartbeat slow, steady, determined even as his own tears fell silently onto my hair. We sat there for a long time. Buses came and went, their doors hissing open, the drivers glancing at us with impatience before moving on. People walked past, couples holding hands, teenagers laughing at their phones, an elderly man walking his dog. None of them stopped. None of them noticed two 60-year-olds sitting on a cold bench, their lives in ruins around them. Is this how it feels to become invisible? Is this what happens when you give everything you have, and the people you gave it to decide you are no longer useful? I thought about the house. I could not stop thinking about it. I thought about the kitchen, where I had cooked 10,000 breakfasts and just as many dinners. I thought about the living room, where we had gathered every Christmas morning, the floor covered in wrapping paper, the children shrieking with joy. I thought about Michael's bedroom, where I had painted the walls blue when he was 7 because he said blue was his favorite color. I thought about Sarah's room, smaller but cozy, with the window that overlooked the garden where she used to sit and read for hours. I thought about the garden. The rose bushes David had planted the year we moved in, which still bloomed every summer. The vegetable patch where we had grown tomatoes and cucumbers and taught the children where food came from. The tire swing that hung from the old oak tree, which Michael and Sarah had fought over endlessly when they were small. All of it. Gone. Not destroyed, not lost to fire or flood, but taken. Taken by the very people I had built it for. The flashbacks came in waves, each one more painful than the last. I saw Michael at 3 years old, sitting on my lap in the kitchen, flour on his nose, giggling as we baked chocolate chip cookies together. "Mummy, can I lick the spoon?" he had asked, and I had laughed and said yes, even though I knew I should not, because his joy was worth more than a perfectly clean kitchen. I saw Sarah at 5, standing at the front door in her school uniform, clutching my hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What if no one likes me?" she had whispered, and I had knelt down and looked into her eyes and said, "Then they don't know what they're missing." I saw birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that had felt extraordinary at the time. I saw sick days when the children stayed home from school and I read them stories until my voice went hoarse. I saw summer afternoons in the garden, the sprinkler running, the children shrieking as they ran through the cold water. I saw David teaching Michael to ride a bicycle, jogging alongside him with his hands outstretched, ready to catch him if he fell. I saw myself braiding Sarah's hair before her school play, telling her she was the most beautiful girl in the world. I saw love. I saw sacrifice. I saw 40 years of devotion, compressed into moments that felt like lifetimes. And then I saw the door. The locked door. The frosted glass with the shadow behind it. The cold, cold voice of my daughter-in-law telling me to leave. The contrast was unbearable. The weight of what we had built, measured against the cruelty of how it ended, was too much for my heart to carry. I bent forward on the bench, pressing my face into my hands, and I wept. I wept until my throat was raw, until my eyes burned, until there was nothing left inside me but an aching, hollow emptiness. David held me through all of it. He did not try to fix it. He did not offer hollow reassurances or empty promises. He just held me, steady and solid, the way he had held me for 40 years. But even he was breaking. I could feel it in the way his grip tightened, in the tremor that ran through his shoulders. He was trying to be strong for me, the way he always had, but the weight of this betrayal was crushing him too. Eventually, we had to move. The cold was becoming dangerous, and we had nowhere to go. David suggested a hotel, but when we checked our accounts at a cash machine, the numbers made no sense. Our savings had been depleted. The joint account we had kept for emergencies showed a balance of almost nothing. "They took the money too," David said, his voice flat with disbelief. "They took everything." I felt my knees buckle, and David caught me before I hit the ground. He lowered me gently onto a nearby wall, kneeling in front of me, his hands gripping my arms. "Helen, look at me. Look at me." I looked. His face was drawn and pale, decades of stress etched into every line. But his eyes were still the eyes of the man I had married, kind, determined, fiercely protective. "We will get through this," he said. "I don't know how, but we will. Do you hear me? They cannot break us." I nodded, even though I was not sure I believed him. I nodded because I needed to believe him, because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. We walked until we found a small bed and breakfast, the kind with peeling paint and a tired-looking owner who took one look at us and asked no questions. The room was cramped and smelled of mildew, but it had a bed and a heater that wheezed warm air into the space. David paid with the last of the cash in his wallet. I sat on the edge of the bed, too exhausted to undress, too numb to cry anymore. David sat beside me, his head in his hands. 40 years, he said quietly. 40 years of work. 40 years of sacrifice. And this is how it ends. I reached over and took his hand. His skin was rough and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent his life working for his family. I traced my fingers over his knuckles, remembering all the times those hands had held me, protected me, loved me. "It doesn't end here," I said, though my voice was barely a whisper. "It can't." He looked at me, and for the first time since we had walked away from our home, I saw something other than despair in his eyes. I saw determination. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." The days that followed were a blur of confusion and grief. We tried to contact Michael and Sarah, but our calls went unanswered. Our messages were ignored. It was as if we had ceased to exist to them, as if 40 years of love and sacrifice could be erased with the change of a lock and the silence of a phone. We consulted a solicitor, a kind woman who looked at us with sympathetic eyes and spoke in careful, measured tones. She told us that what our children had done was not legal, that we had rights, that we could fight. But she also warned us that it would take time, and money, and emotional energy that we did not have. "They're counting on you being too tired to fight," she said. They're counting on you giving up. I thought about those words for a long time. Giving up. Was that what I was supposed to do? Was that what Michael and Sarah expected of me, to simply disappear, to fade into nothing, to accept my exile from the family I had created? The answer came to me in the middle of the night, in that tiny bed and breakfast room, with David snoring softly beside me and the moon casting pale light through the thin curtains. No. I would not give up. I would not disappear. I had spent 40 years being strong for my family. Now it was time to be strong for myself. But being strong does not mean being unbroken. It means carrying on even when every step feels impossible. The weeks turned into months. We found a small flat to rent, barely larger than a single room, with walls that seemed to close in around us. David picked up part-time work at a hardware store, refusing to let me take a job, insisting that I rest, that I heal. But how do you heal from this? How do you mend a heart that has been shattered by the very people who were supposed to love you most? I would wake in the night, sweating and shaking, from dreams of my children. Dreams where they were young again, where they ran into my arms laughing, where they told me they loved me and meant it. And then I would wake, and the reality would crash down like a wave, and I would lie there in the dark, crying silently so I would not wake David. Some days, I could barely function. I would sit by the window, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of their lives in my mind. Where had I gone wrong? What had I done to deserve this? Had I not loved them enough? Had I loved them too much? The questions circled endlessly, vultures feeding on my pain. David tried to help. He brought me tea and held my hand and reminded me, over and over, that this was not my fault. But I could see the toll it was taking on him too. His hair grew grayer. His shoulders stooped. The light that had always danced in his eyes began to dim. We were aging before each other's eyes, not from time but from grief. One evening, I felt something shift inside me. I was sitting alone in the flat while David was at work, staring at a photograph I had managed to keep, a faded picture of Michael and Sarah on Christmas morning, maybe 15 years ago. They were smiling, their faces bright with joy, surrounded by wrapping paper and gifts. I looked at those faces, and I felt my chest tighten. What happened to you? I whispered to the photograph. Where did you go? The silence of the room pressed in around me, and suddenly I could not breathe. A wave of pain crashed over me, so intense that I gasped, pressing my hand to my chest. My heart was racing, pounding against my ribs as if trying to escape the agony. I collapsed onto the floor, curling into myself, sobbing with a force that shook my entire body. How did our own children become strangers? I cried, the words tearing from my throat. How did this happen? There was no answer. There would never be an answer. David found me there an hour later, still on the floor, still weeping. He knelt beside me, his own eyes glistening with tears, and he gathered me into his arms. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you, Helen. I'm here. He rocked me gently, the way I had once rocked our children when they were scared, and slowly, so slowly, the storm inside me began to ease. But it did not disappear. It never disappears. It just settles into a permanent ache, a weight that you carry with you every moment of every day, a reminder of what you have lost. Time passed. A year. 2 years. The legal battle dragged on, complicated by technicalities and delays and the endless cruelty of a system that seemed designed to exhaust rather than protect. We got the house back, eventually. The courts ruled in our favor, finding that what our children had done was illegal, that they had exploited our trust and taken what was not theirs to take. But by then, the house no longer felt like home. We stood on the doorstep, the same doorstep where we had been locked out all those months ago, and I pressed my hand to the wood just as I had done on that terrible night. This time, the door opened. But the warmth I had expected to feel was not there. The rooms were empty. Michael and Catherine had taken everything, the furniture, the photographs, the small treasures that had marked our lives. Even the rose bushes in the garden had been dug up, leaving behind bare patches of earth like open wounds. David walked through the house in silence, his footsteps echoing on the bare floors. I followed him, room by room, seeing ghosts in every corner. The ghost of Michael riding his tricycle through the hallway. The ghost of Sarah practicing cartwheels in the living room. The ghost of Christmas mornings and birthday parties and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that had made this place sacred. They were all gone now. Erased. We could sell it, David said quietly, standing in what had once been our bedroom. Start fresh somewhere else. I shook my head. No, I said. This is our home. We built it. We will stay. We did stay. We furnished the rooms again, slowly, with second-hand furniture and items donated by friends who had heard our story. We planted new roses in the garden. We hung new photographs on the walls, pictures of David and me, of places we had traveled, of memories we had made together. But we did not hang pictures of our children. We could not bear to. Some people ask me if I have forgiven them. Michael and Sarah. The children I raised, the children I loved, the children who betrayed me. I do not know how to answer that question. Forgiveness is not a switch you can flip. It is not a decision you make once and then forget. It is a journey, long and painful, with no guaranteed destination. There are days when I feel something close to peace, when I can look back on their lives and remember the good without drowning in the bad. There are other days when the anger rises up like a tide, threatening to consume me, and I have to remind myself to breathe. What I do know is this: I will not let their betrayal define me. I will not let their cruelty become my legacy. I am more than the mother they rejected. I am more than the woman they locked out. I am Helen Morris. I have lived 60 years on this earth, and I have loved fiercely, sacrificed endlessly, and survived more than anyone should have to survive. That is my legacy. Not their betrayal. My resilience. To any parent reading this, to any mother or father who has felt the cold sting of rejection from the very children they raised, I want you to know that you are not alone. This happens. It happens more often than anyone wants to admit, because we live in a world that worships youth and discards age, that values independence over interdependence, that teaches our children to chase their dreams without looking back at the people who made those dreams possible. It is not fair. It is not right. It is a wound that may never fully heal. But you are not broken. You are not worthless. You are not defined by how your children treat you. You are defined by how you treated them. By the love you gave, even when it was not returned. By the sacrifices you made, even when they went unnoticed. By the home you built, even if the doors were locked against you. I still live in the house. David and I, together, as we have been for 40 years. We sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set, just as we always planned. We hold hands and remember what we built here, not with bitterness but with quiet pride. The house is older now, as are we. The walls need repainting. The garden needs tending. My hands shake when I pour the tea, and David's knees ache when he climbs the stairs. But we are still here. Still together. Still standing. Sometimes, I dream of a knock on the door. I dream that I open it and find Michael and Sarah standing there, tears streaming down their faces, asking for forgiveness. In my dreams, I pull them into my arms and hold them the way I held them when they were children, and I tell them that I love them, that I have always loved them, that nothing they do could ever change that. I wake from those dreams with an ache in my chest that never quite goes away. But I do not wait for that knock anymore. I do not live my life in anticipation of a reconciliation that may never come. Instead, I live. I tend my garden. I cook my meals. I hold my husband's hand. I cherish the friends who stood by us when our own family did not. And every morning, I unlock the door of my own home, the home I built, the home that was taken, the home I reclaimed, and I step outside into the light. Because that is what survival looks like. That is what strength looks like. That is what love, true, enduring love, looks like. I spent 40 years building the house my children would one day call home. They locked the doors against me, thinking that would be the end of my story. But they were wrong. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. Because the house does not define me. The door does not define me. The lock does not define me. I define me. My love. My sacrifice. My resilience. And no lock, no door, no betrayal, nothing can ever take that away. This is Helen Morris. This is my story. And if you are living a story like mine, please know that your worth does not depend on the people who failed to see it. Your worth is in every meal you cooked, every lullaby you sang, every sacrifice you made in silence, every tear you shed for children who forgot how to love you back. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And somewhere, somehow, the world will see your light even if the ones you raised chose to look away.